Sandy, do you enjoy drinking whiskey?
I enjoy drinking whiskey in moderation, but I do enjoy it.
When would you usually have a glass of whiskey?
I like drinking whiskey in the early evening. I find that I don't really take to it much later on in the evening, but early evening is a wonderful time to have a whiskey.
And would it be usually a malt or a blend?
I don't have any particular preference in that I'm happy with a malt or a blend. I suppose that I do have certain sorts of malts that I like more than others. I'm very fond of the Speyside malts, which of course are very smooth, but as the years go by, I find that I'm becoming more understanding of island malts. They used to strike me as being a little bit perhaps medicinal, not so now.
It used to be said that the Islay malts were for drinking out of doors. Maybe it would be a nice drink when you're sailing.
I like to think of myself as a sailor, but I don't have many skills in that department, but I do sail, and I would have thought an Islay malt would be an ideal thing to have on the boat.
Do you find whiskey to be stimulating or relaxing?
The question of whether one should ever have a drink before one writes is one which a number of authors have thought about, and the general consensus is that you shouldn't. And I think I probably would go along with that I don't think it really helps one to write, to have a whiskey or indeed anything else beforehand. I think that when one's thinking, if one's going to think before one writes, then that might be the time to have a whiskey. But again, various writers have different views on that. Some writers would say you should never do that, but certainly something which might help one to dream a little might be helpful.
And what about your characters? Does Ma Ramotswe, does she drink whiskey at all?
Ma Ramotswe, who's the principal character in the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series of books, doesn't drink whiskey. She doesn't drink alcohol at all. She drinks something called red bush tea or rooibos tea, which is terribly good for you. And indeed, nobody in those books actually tends to drink whiskey or indeed anything other than tea. Tea is the staple as far as the #1 Ladies Detective Agency is concerned.
As a matter of interest, is there much alcohol drunk in Botswana?
In Botswana, no, I mean, it's not for this program.
Well, we'll leave that question.
Leave that one.
Now, shall we turn to Isabel Dalhousie? Does she enjoy a dram? She does. Doesn't she?
My Scottish characters in my Scottish books, they would drink whiskey. Some of them. They either drink whiskey or they drink wine. Isabel Dalhousie, for example, likes a glass of New Zealand white wine, and that's a concession to my New Zealand readers who asked me that she should do this, and I agreed. But I think that she would like the occasional whiskey. In one of the books, she goes to a whiskey nosing, which is given by a character called Charles MacLean in the books, and she rather enjoys that.
Yes, you are very generous in introducing real people to your books. Are you open to approaches in this regard?
I do put real people in my books. My latest book in the Isabel Dalhousie series, The Right Attitude to Reign, has a number of real people. But it's usually at my invitation rather than at their suggestion. And certainly when I'm approached by various organisations and asked to sell a place in one of my books, perhaps for charity. Not that I don't wish to support charity, it's just that I don't sell places in the books, and everybody who appears in the books appears on a totally voluntary basis. I'm very interested in language, obviously, as a writer. One of the things which particularly interests me in relation to whiskey is the language which people use to describe whiskey. Not only the physical appearance, which obviously tests one's words for colour, but also the words for scent, for smell and taste. And I find it absolutely fascinating to see the metaphors that are used by whiskey nosers, by whiskey tasters. It differs so much from the language which is used by people who drink wine, where I think one has a slightly strained terminology brought in sometimes some somewhat pretentious terminology, whereas the terms used for the taste of whiskey are very down to earth. When one talks about wet straw, for example, or old leather, or old boots, those are wonderful terms, very honest.
Some of the words that we use, of course, are very peculiar to our own culture, and one wonders how well they transfer to other cultures. And that raises the question of, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but that raises the question of whether different races smell in the same way or smell the same smells. Mm-hmm. Would you think anything about that?
I think it would be very interesting to compare the way in which whiskey is understood and tasted and smelled by people from different cultures, in that it's possible that people in different cultures get a whole different experience of it. I think that's a very interesting thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Fun enough, when I was in Taiwan, I met someone who was setting up a Chinese language website, and one of the things they were planning to do was to if you like, create an aroma wheel and then gather descriptors from people on the site and to try and see how would they translate, breakfast cereal, for example, or hen's mash.
Yes,
or
that's very
whatever,
interesting. Because certainly people have different attitudes towards smells according to culture, and we I think can smell rather unpleasant in the Oriental nose. I think some people in the Far East regard us as being a bit smelly. And it may be that they would therefore resort to very specific terms to describe smells, such as smells like a Scotsman.